Now let's talk about naming conventions. So we have different conventions for naming our variables and constants, and different teams prefer different conventions. So there is really no right or wrong here. But let me show you the popular conventions. So earlier we declared a variable called file size. The way we name this variable follows what we call the snake case. So with this convention, we have to use lowercase letters to name our variables and constants. And if we have multiple words, we should separate them using an underscore. Now we have another convention called Pascal case, in which we should capitalize the first letter of every word. So the same variable using Pascal case looks like this. This is Pascal case. And by the way, the text that I put here that starts with 2 forward slashes, this is called a comment. We'll talk about comments later in this section, but for now, just remember that comments are a way to describe our code. They don't get compiled, okay? Now we have another convention that is similar to Pascal case. The only difference is that the first letter of the first word should be lowercase. So file size. This is camel case. We also have Hungarian notation, which is a pretty old notation and it's not relevant anymore. With Hungarian notation, we should prefix the name of our variables with a letter that specifies their type. So here we have an integer, so we use a lowercase I and then file size, just like Pascal case. This is called Hungarian notation. Now, quite frankly, this is a very old notation. It's not relevant anymore, but I still see people using it. I've seen it a lot in Windows source code. The reason this is not relevant anymore is because in the old days, we didn't have good editors. So if we declared a variable somewhere and we wanted to know its type, we had to scroll up to find the type of that variable. So with Hungarian notation, we could look at a variable and immediately tell its type. But this is not the case anymore because these days we have powerful editors. If we simply hover our mouse over any variable, we can see its type. So here you can see file size is an integer variable, right? So these are the popular conventions out there. In this course, I'm going to use camel case for naming our variables and constants, and Pascal case for naming our classes. We'll talk about classes later in the course. Now, if you don't like these conventions and prefer to use snake case, that's totally fine, but make sure to stick to your own convention. The more consistent your code is, the easier it is to read, understand, and maintain it. Next, we're going to talk about mathematical expressions.